Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Right Politics. So, what I wanted to talk about today is a very real fact that everything that has happened in Israel that has been very present for a long time has basically been swept under the rug because of the election cycle that's happening here in America. Not everyone is very attentive of what's going on these days down in Israel. And that really makes me feel like not horrible, like I'm not Israeli or anything, but the people who are still suffering, the people who are going through their own genocide, are not getting a proper voice. There is one news outlet that is giving them a voice, which is CBN News, and they are really good. The hostages have been taken for over 110 days. Rockets are being fired into Israel by Hamas terrorists, which, meantime, in the United States, they are being praised and basically worshipped by these college students who have never worked a day in their lives, who, it goes through these cycles. They demand communism, they demand socialism, and now they demand genocide against the Jews. So, what does that mean for the Republic of America? Well, we are going to be continuing to let free ideas reign and free speech, but when does it cross the line to being a tyranny type of actions that are taken out against Jewish people here in the United States and abroad? Well, these people, when they go to universities, especially in the United States, they are, I would say, brainwashed with all these ideas of Marxism, communism, and it really takes its toll over time. It's not something that happens on the first day, but when they start taking these classes, these professors practically worship the ideas of Marxism and communism, although it's failed in every single state that it's been tried. For one example, Cuba, a country that I've been to several times, even lived in for a month, it's such a dramatic change. When you take away people's rights of freedom of speech, people go to jail for speaking against the president. When you take away the right of free enterprise, there are no such thing as private businesses. Everything's run by the state, but the state cannot get their act together. You go into a Cuban store and you see broccoli, beans, and octopus, because the only people they trade with are the Chinese, and apparently Chinese really like octopus. No, they trade with Mexico too, but it's such an irony that they trade with Mexico to get United States products like Coca-Cola, but they won't trade with America. And when you look at that, when you see the pattern of the ideology being pushed on young people before they even have a right, or sorry, not a right, a chance to get out in the world and exercise the right to vote, it makes you wonder, well, are they just trying to make a propaganda machine? And the answer is yes, because anyone who's supporting Hamas and supporting the Palestinian people, they're doing it out of ignorance, the Palestinian people. They need to be supported in humanitarian ways, but they did elect a government that uses them as human shields, that puts their operational bases inside of hospitals and underground, and they store hordes of ammo in people's houses. And they also store their hostages in people's houses. They wear civilian clothes, these terrorists, Hamas, when they fight, so that when they're killed, they will look like another civilian casualty, which goes against the rules of war. And all of this is done because they want to have their leader, their Allah, their God, to come back. And in order to do that, they have to commit genocide against the Jews. It's literally in their religion. It's written down. So those who are militarized will carry those acts out basically until the end of time, but their God's not coming. And you want for compassion to be given on all people. But when you see an 18-year-old with a Palestinian flag, not knowing the dynamics that Israel was for the Jews, and it was taken by the Jews way back when Moses came and his successor took the land, and they took it from the Canaanites, and they took it from all these groups. The Palestinians weren't even established until thousands of years later. King David reigned in the land for, the very beginning after Saul, and that was couple thousand years before Jesus. It has always been the Jews' land, and the Palestinians were visitors who settled there when the Jews got disbanded. And the Jews have always been exiled, but they've always come back. So to suggest that from the river to the sea, they want for all of Palestine to be given back and taken over the Jewish territory, that's not going to happen after World War II, because the United Nations granted the homeland back to the Jews after the Holocaust. But what Hamas is wanting is another Holocaust. They're wanting to exterminate the Jews or send them away. So one of the ways to fix this that the United Nations and the United States are trying to bring together is a two-state solution. And originally I thought that would be a good idea because it would be a democracy that'd be recognized by the United Nations. But now, after Hamas has just completely destroyed parts of Israel, and they're continuing to have attacks against civilians, which goes against the art of war and the rules of war, it shows to me that the Palestinian people are not responsible enough to elect leaders who have their best interests, who are not radicals. Because the radicals are the ones destroying Israel and destroying their own people. So if they were to be an official state and have recognition by the UN, they will completely abuse their power in the same way they stole humanitarian aid and in the same way that they use hostages as human shields and civilians. And these people killed babies, they killed mothers, they raped women and killed them in front of the Jewish people. It was a mini Holocaust that happened on October 7th. And that is why when you see someone supporting these groups, they are not on the side of what is best in the world and what is right in the world. You can say the Palestinians were occupied, they were given the land, they had opportunities to vote for their independence, they turned it down, and they voted for leaders that said, we're not going to take the West Bank, but death to Israel. So the Israelis are on defense. That's why it's called the IDF. It's the Israeli defense. And they only go on offensive for the hostages, and the hostages are still being held. So it's very good to understand all sides of a war before you go and make, I would say, a fool of yourself on social media, promoting one side or the other. Now, I've always supported Israel because I'm also a Christian and Christians support Israel. But the way that these things happen, if it was reversed, if Israelis went inside Palestine and murdered, 1,500 people, including babies and children, that would be different. But it was the Palestinians. So their only defense is that it was an act of resistance. But if you really want to resist an occupying government, as they say they are being occupied, you do it through democracy, not by killing innocent civilians. This is something that the mafia didn't even do publicly. And, they didn't have the full support of the government. They only had the support of the imaginations of Americans because of movies like The Godfather. But what's going on in the Middle East has always been going on. It's just very publicized now. There are still hostages, and the war's not going to be over until all those hostages are released. So, with that said, moving on from Israel, the election is going to be held for the primary of New Hampshire today with Nikki Haley versus Donald Trump. So Donald Trump has the lead at about 60%. I believe he's going to win by about 75%. There's such strong evidence that he will be a good president because of the 4 years he was in office. There's such a respect for him because of what he served and what he is going through now with the false attacks against his businesses and Stormy Daniels and the prosecutors being elected just to prosecute Trump in any way possible. They didn't even give a direct way. It was just like, we are going to take down Trump and if you elect us. And that's what those prosecutors are trying to do. And they're all trying it right before the election, and all the court dates are set up right by the primary, so he cannot be on the ground where he needs to be. And this is what happens in a banana republic. Every country in Central America has either killed or arrested their political opponents at one point or another. And, our Constitution says that if our government is corrupt or if it turns into a tyranny, we as the people have a right to resist it and start a new government. I don't think we're there yet, but with the Joe Biden-Harris administration destroying the middle class, it makes it very difficult to live in the richest country in the world. Um, Everyone I know went from working 30 hours to 40 hours to 50 hours to 80 hours, one person just to survive. It's very, very difficult, and it's being done on purpose. It's a political economy. People who are in the working class are being completely destroyed. If you had $10,000 in your savings account back in 2020, it's only gets you about $7,000 worth of buying power because of the inflation. Real inflation is about 60% on food. Anywhere you go in 2020, every dollar item is $1.65 now. There's no one inflation size. Everything inflates differently, and food's the highest. And I've been saying this for years that they're doing this to destroy the middle class, because if there's no middle class, there's just lower and upper class. So the reason why the black votes are moving away from Biden and the Latino votes are moving away from Biden is because they are seeing his policies work out in real time. They cannot afford bread and eggs. They cannot afford the necessities. They cannot afford to be complacent in their jobs. And if they don't have a job, they have to live with relatives. And in every third world country, you see three families living in one house because the rent's so expensive. And that's what's happening in America. It is very rare for an individual to make it on his own on a minimum wage job. And if he does make it on his own, he's done it by working 70, 80 hours a week. And it's by design. They want to destroy the middle class. They want to cripple us because money is power. Money is freedom. If you take away the ability to make a substantial living, which means the money is worth less, you get to buy less goods, you lose your freedom. When gas prices are high, you lose your freedom to go where you want to go. They want us to be completely substitute to their rules. And it damages the incentive of those who do work, because those who do put the most hours in, they're not getting what they paid for anymore and what they worked for. And I guarantee you, if every American who's working as hard as they are in 2024, if they were working that hard in 2020, they'd be very, very rich and well off. But now they're just barely surviving, and it's all by design. They control us through making the ability to make money harder, and then the money that we make inflates, so it buys less purchasing power. They want it to happen like that, so we become more dependent on government subsidies and government programs, and it's all by design. So if you're an immigrant and you come to this country and you go and you buy eggs and it's freaking $9, that's bad, because immigrants are the backbone of this country, and you cannot dismiss them either. But it's becoming harder and harder for everyone. And it's the policies of Joe Biden and Harris that are doing that. Harris would not be a better president. She would not be a good cabinet member in any way in any future administration either. So they need to be out. The question now is Donald Trump or Haley. I really think Donald Trump will have the best outcome, and the best experience will show he will prevent wars that are being planned by our adversaries. China's about to take Taiwan, and they're going to take it if Joe Biden remains president, and a war will start over it because they saw Russia take Ukraine with ease. And the United States wanted a proxy war, and they got it. And they're not defending, our allies like they should, which Trump would have put boots on the ground, and the invasion would have never happened. So now China is saying we are going to take Taiwan. And I believe it's going to happen unless Donald Trump is elected president again, which he will put boots on the ground and he will say, don't touch Taiwan. And they won't, because they know the United States military will have a long campaign war that could last 20 years. And for the economic prosperity of both nations, they have to set aside their military conflicts, which, by the way, China is rising. But the United States can never go on a war with China that would last long term, because we're so dependent on them for our goods and services. Everything's manufactured in China. All of the elites would not have their Starbucks. All of the cars that are being transported by Chinese companies, just about every country who participates in our economy, China makes up a majority of the the products that are shipped to us, and Americans cannot be dependent on China and then support a war because they would not get their items. Look at what happened when the supply chain went down. People were losing their minds because they couldn't get their new iPhones. Well, that's what a war with China would entail. No one would get their new iPhones. No one would be able to basically purchase any new goods because there'd be a blockade on goods coming from China. We would have to be more nationalist or buy from the Swedes or whoever. So I really want for you guys to, of course, always keep in touch with politics. Be sure to like and subscribe to this channel for more videos like this, and we'll see you on another episode of Right Politics.